So the language that's in this box right here, excuse me, came directly from the Maine core value language that Maine set out as part of what we're required to have in a student code of conduct. And these are sort of the core values and ethics that were agreed on statewide. That was several years ago, though. I almost think it might have been 2010 or before that. But when we took a close look at those, we decided really we do all of those within what's been called our habits for success. So that's sort of the crossover. So here we have RSU 13 has compiled these values into our habits for success. As students move through grades pre-K through 12, they receive frequent and actionable feedback on, and that actually should say these habits, helping shape our students into ethical, caring, and civil community members. And then we have 3 habits for success that we specifically report out on in grades K through 8, but the overarching respect really helps to provide some context for the other ones, which are responsibility, collaboration, and perseverance. Okay,
we can.
Next page is just the table of contents with all the hyperlinks.
Right.
This page just defines the habits for success, and all of this language comes from the statements that we use. If you've received a K through 5 progress report under homeroom, it states these statements under perseverance, collaboration, and responsibility. And we sort of took a mishmash between the language that we use in K5 and the language that we use in 6-8. It was pretty comparable, but some of the look fors in 6-8 are just a little bit different from what you might look for in K5. So we just tried to mesh that language. And then we developed some language under respect that we all agreed on. Partnership with families we felt was really important, so we put some bullets in there. Particular section. Okay. And then the next section here is how to use the document, which really explains what the levels are. There's 4 levels. The first 2 are more of the restorative approach. So level 1 is representing interventions and instruction. It could simply be a restorative circle. It could be some sort of a logical consequence or behavior contract. So we're not limited to this list, but it just gives it some samples of ideas there. And level 2, if there's a behavior, we use chronic talking because we found that as sort of a funny one. It's not like a really severe behavior, but we all are familiar with the chronic talkers. And I think some of our administrators are self-admitted chronic talkers. So that was a good example that we used as we were trying to think through, okay, what's the progression here? So a chronic talker in a classroom really might just be redirection the first time it happens, a conversation with the teacher, maybe some instruction around how can we avoid being tempted to have these conversations in the classroom. Maybe within the same day, it happens again, or it's a pattern that starts to be established over a week's period of time. At that point, it might move from a level 1 behavior to a level 2 behavior, where really the student needs a plan. There needs to be some sort of a team that's getting together, a student intervention team, and they're drawing up some sort of a plan to discuss the function of the behavior. Maybe the function of the behavior is the student is in too close of a proximity to friends, so then there's a plan to move them, and so forth and so on. Chronic talker is unlikely to become the type of an issue that's going to ever rise to the level of suspension. But there could be an instance where perhaps a chronic talker then starts to have an issue anytime they're addressed by the teacher. It could become, more of like an insubordination type of an issue. There are level 3 responses that would include the disciplinary action of suspension, which could be in-school suspension or it could be out-of-school suspension. And then a level 4 would be the disciplinary action of expulsion. And these just link back to our Well, these actually link to specific sections that pull language out from our policy. So nothing changes within our policy. This is just a document that's pulling all of our policy language into one place and explains how we deal with the behaviors. So I'm going to jump down here for a minute just to give you a little bit of context. So under general expectations, where you might see like the chronic talking or sort of general disruptions, most of those instances, the first time that they happen would be a level 1. So your starting point as an administrator when you're dealing with behavior is you're going directly to level 1 for the first instance that behavior occurs. When the behavior starts to become ongoing or is in more than one setting or potentially includes disrespect, that's when you move from a level 1 response to a level 2 response. You might move from a level 2 response to a level 3 response if the plan is not leading to improvement over a reasonable amount of time and or the behaviors escalate, again, in either an aggressive manner or a higher level of insubordination. There is no level 4 here because it's not likely that any of these general types of behaviors are going to lead to expulsion. When you go down the document, and so same here with attendance, there's no expulsion for attendance related issues. It's also not likely to be applicable that if you have an attendance issue, we're going to suspend you. It might be an in-school suspension because we're keeping the child in school and putting them on a plan to get work done, but we're not giving out of school suspension for attendance related issues. That just wouldn't make sense. So we reference back to the levels here, excuse me, and these all link back to the how to use the document page because it goes back to how do you implement a level 1? How do you implement a level 2? But each of the types of behaviors has this table at the bottom, sort of as the inroad, like what's the starting point for the behavior? There are a few tables. Again, some that aren't going to have a level 3 or a level 4 at all. And some like harassment, bullying, and hazing that don't have a level 1. There is no initial first time when we're dealing with that. And it's, first of all, when there's an investigation and it's found that that investigation is showing that the instance is bullying, we're starting immediately with a level 2, if not a level 3 response. There might also be other instances like under the tobacco and alcohol where there is no X in level 1. There might be some situation where, and this might be under weapons as well, where maybe we have a kindergartner that brought something in from home, not knowing what it was that they brought in from home. There's no intent there, but they found a cigarette on mom and dad's, dresser, and they brought it in for show and tell, and things like that happen. So there might be some learning opportunities here for children that, it's a one-time thing. So we're not putting them on a plan like level 2. It's a teachable, instructable moment. But if it's
teacher discretion then, and then it goes no further, or does it get reported somewhere in the pipeline? You just see how that goes.
So it would anything like that would automatically go to the principal and they would deal with it. But there is language in here that allows the principal a level of discretion. So they, if a kindergartner brings in a cigarette, they're not automatically going to be suspended. We're not going to jump to that. And we're not going to have them go through the whole tobacco policy. They're not, they don't know what it is. They're not using it. So, and you'll see that here in weapons, violence, and school safety as well. There's no X here. There might be instances, it really is situation dependent, that we might start with a level 1 or a level 2, depending on what's taking place. But more often than not, the first inroad is likely going to be suspension. And we did put some language in here around Administrators can exercise discretion when responding to student behaviors in order to consider intentionality and legality of those behaviors. So they really are looking at both of those pieces in every instance, regardless of what the type of behavior is.
Okay.
The student discipline section, we did not write this. That's just a copy and paste of policy JK, again, just so it's all in one spot there. And then we did have a conversation about bus conduct. So there is a section that's specific to bus conduct, but really all of these expectations apply to the bus as well. And these are all set up with the first paragraph being the expected behavior, sort of the positive, what do we as a school district expect of our students? So we expect them to follow our general rules, the way that we've outlined them. And then we have some examples, and this is not an exhaustive list. It's just to provide, some of the things that might be inconsistent with our expectations are insubordination, profanity and obscenities, and disruption. And there's just some examples to give some context to what we mean by that. We've outlined, and every single one is set up like this. We've outlined the habits for success, our expectations that align with the behaviors that we're expecting. And then what those inroads look like if the behaviors are not meeting our expectation. And so these all follow, they all link back to our policy language. They all start with the positive of what we're expecting of the students. Many of them link back to some quick references that, again, are just copy and paste of the policy language, because this is really intended to be a document that principals can use as well and keep open as they're dealing with any discipline issues.
Okay.
And then again, like I was showing you before, what are some of the look fors of how do we move among the levels? Personal property, remaining on school grounds, academic and social integrity. I'll just sort of slowly scroll through all of these. Tobacco, alcohol, other drugs and medication, weapons, violence, and school safety. And that was it for all of our regular expectations. And then we have our non-negotiables. So section here are the non-negotiables. So you mentioned sort of the, what are the ones that we have zero tolerance for? Serious or repeated violations. There is no level 1 and level 2 response here. It may be that if a student is ultimately suspended and we don't go the route of expulsion for one of these, once the suspension is provided, we would still go back to a level 1 of having a restorative process for the student to come back to the school. That's still part of what our processes are. Okay. So just because there's X's here doesn't mean, we're not going to do anything restorative for that person. But anything serious or repeated in nature, and repeated as in, again, not just, this is not chronic talking that's repeated to the point that we're going to consider expelling the student. This is much more serious. So it's serious or repeated violations of one or more of the rules that may require a need for strong parent-administrator communication, coordination, consideration of outside assistance, and might result in a suspension or possible expulsion. And then the other one is endangerment. Students are expected to show respectful behavior toward themselves and others, in addition, be responsible for their own role in providing a safe learning environment. A student that endangers the safety of self or places others at risk will be suspended and or possibly expelled. And then again, of course, same thing. There's likely to be, if they're suspended, some sort of a re-entry plan to work with the student.
Okay, thank you.
So the rest is pretty straightforward then. Suspension, I'll point out just a couple of things. Suspension and or expulsion as disciplinary action all of this is copied and pasted from our current policy language with the exception of this language that I'm highlighting here. In the same legislation that requires the restorative language in a student code of conduct, there was also language that we cannot exceed 3 school days for grades 5 and below for suspension for any serious infraction. So we no longer can suspend, and I don't think we did very often, if ever, but we cannot suspend students in 5th grade or below for any more than 3 days.
Okay.
Disciplinary removal of students with disabilities. Again, this is copied and pasted policy language, but important to have that in here as a reference for our principals. And bus conduct. So this is also policy language that has been copied and pasted. This comes directly from our policy language about what the bus driver will do if there's a first offense, second offense, or a 3rd through 5th offense. So that procedure is already laid out for us. So we didn't make any changes to that. We just, again, put it all in one place.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the final piece is just a reference to policy KE. So we just thought it was important to reference back to that policy as well.
Okay.